Welcome to Independently Speaking, the podcast from the Independent Schools Association. ISA represents head teachers leading independent schools across the UK, each one unique. From small community schools to specialist institutions focused on performing arts, outdoor education, faith, sport, or special educational needs. ISA members reflect the remarkable diversity of independent education. Join us as we hear from school leaders navigating the challenges and opportunities shaping their schools and the wider sector. And now, here is your host, ISA Director of Education and Inclusion, Helen Stanton-Tonner.
Welcome to the ISA podcast, Independently Speaking. I am your host, Helen Stanton-Tonner, the Director of Education and Inclusion for ISA. In this episode, we're exploring leadership in independent education and what it means to step into headship for the first time, to lead teams through change and to balance tradition with innovation in a challenging and evolving sector. Joining me today is Charles Bailey, who has recently taken up his first role as headmaster at Worksop College and Ranby House in North Nottinghamshire. Charles joined Worksop from Harrow School, bringing with him experience from one of the country's most established and highly resourced independent schools. Charles's journey offers a fascinating perspective on leadership, development, organisational culture and strategic vision. Charles, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Great. Thank you for having me, Helen. It's great to be here, and thank you to the ISA for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
Brilliant. Now, Charles, can we start with your leadership journey? So you spent many years at Harrow, one of the country's sort of most established independent schools. So what aspects of independent education really shaped your leadership thinking during that time?
Yeah, so I had quite a varied career at Harrow, and before that I was at a place called Forest School in North East London, independent co-educational school. And one of the great things about being at a school like Harrow, and I was there for 11 years, is the number of different leadership opportunities you can have. So, you might start off by taking on pastoral leadership roles and then move into more academic roles. And you then have a chance to know what kind of impact you want to have on what part of the school. So I had many roles. I was an assistant housemaster, a resident tutor, living in boarding houses with my wife and my family, and then moved into the sort of academic running of things. So I was a head of department, head of religious studies. I was also head of learning support, which was a slightly unusual role, but probably when I look back on it, a really important moment, because it was one of those jobs that I think at the time within the school wasn't particularly attractive, but someone had to do it, and I put my hand up and put my all into it. And now when I give advice to colleagues who are thinking about progressing, I say actually maybe look for the opportunities that perhaps seem a little less glamorous, and do your very best in those areas, and then you can carve out a niche for yourself. I then took on a role called Academic and Universities Director, so it's a sort of day-to-day academic running of the school, internal exams, timetabling, etc., and also UCAS and American University applications. And then my last role at the school was Director of Studies, so Deputy Head Academic, and enjoyed leading the heads of department and the academic strategy of the school. So I was very fortunate that Harrow gave me so many different opportunities, and it's allowed me now to hopefully use some of my expertise pastorally and academically to bring to a new school that has its own rich history and its own really positive way of doing things, but just to cast a kind of critical eye over how things are done at Worksop, and maybe suggest different approaches or suggest sort of refinements. But no, it's been an interesting journey, and definitely not one that was particularly well planned. And I think I was very fortunate in many ways that opportunities arose when they did at the right time for me.
It's so true what you were saying, about taking on the different roles and responsibilities, even the ones that don't seem so glamorous, because you never know, do you, which ones are going to be the ones which you might need to turn to later on in your career. I think that's a really important part of a journey within education, isn't it?
Yeah, no, completely, and learning to work with people that normally have a lot more expertise than you. So I remember going into that learning support department, surrounded by great learning support specialists and SEND specialists, EAL specialists, and having to really listen to them. And yes, offer some advice here and there and lead the department. But I was the least qualified in the team. But that was humbling, but also a really important learning moment for me.
And with this being your first role as a headmaster, what do you think surprised you the most about sort of the freedoms and responsibilities which come with leading an independent school? And what do you think's been your biggest learning moment so far?
Yeah, great question. I don't really think of my job as one of freedom. Yes, you've got autonomy, but there's a big weight of expectation, more so now than ever before. Parents are really on side, but we've got to make sure that we're providing value for money. As I've said to our staff here, we've put together a brand new strategy. It's really exciting. It's a 5-year strategy, and for some parents, that's all very interesting, but you get one shot at educating a child. And, if they're in the lower sixth, they don't want to know what's going on in 5 years' time. They want to make sure that the quality of education is really high now. So I think one of the challenges has been trying to balance an ambitious forward-thinking strategy with making sure that the day-to-day product is still of a really high standard. And actually this term at Inset, we've developed a series of non-negotiables amongst our staff so that we are all happy that certain things, irrespective of how tired everyone is and how busy life is, we just never fall below a certain standard, because, as I said, there's a weight of responsibility to make sure we get it right for the children who are here at the school at the moment. I think one of the challenges, I'm sure all heads, I'm sure you experience this as well, Helen, is that when you're in a room, regardless of what's being discussed, people will turn to you at the end of the meeting to make a decision. It could be to do with netball. It could be to do with the orchestra. And again, these are areas that you have very little expertise in, but people still expect you to make a decision. So knowing when to keep your powder dry and actually, and other times when to make a quick and decisive decision is a challenge.
And that move into headship, you're absolutely right. You're taking on a very different level of responsibility, isn't it? And one that's quite hard to prepare for. But was there a particular point when you felt ready to take that step?
Yeah, and I think that's where my experience at Harrow is really helpful. I mean, Harrow is, as you'll be aware, a huge organisation, big set of family of schools internationally as well. Recently taken over a prep school. So I think as a result, the headmasters whom I worked for were very generous with allowing me to have quite a lot of autonomy in my roles and make some decisions that perhaps you would expect to make at a sort of headmaster or headmistress level, particularly thinking about things around HR, employment law, recruitment. So I felt that was a really helpful training ground to then step into this position. Of course, the big difference is the buck stops with you. And, in my previous roles, I always had colleagues above me who could support me or make a final decision. I think I realized I wanted to move to headship when I started thinking carefully about impact. So I think you can only make so much impact when you're at a sort of deputy head level. To really make a strategic impact that's long lasting and leave a legacy, I think you need to take the sort of step up to being a head. I'm enjoying it so far.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's leading strategically, isn't it, rather than following the leader as it were. And you're right, strategy really does come into play as a head, which you might not have seen so much within other leadership roles within schools. And were there any assumptions that you had earlier in your career that you've already been sort of challenging since taking on this role?
I think one of them that actually comes down to strategy is that you kind of have this idea that as a head, as a CEO of a school, you're sitting in your office thinking about big picture stuff and just strategizing. It's just not the case. Yes, you should be spending quite a lot of time thinking about strategy. But getting your hands dirty and getting involved in the day-to-day running is just the reality of working in an organization that is as vibrant as a school, and as dynamic as a school. So I think if I think back to the start of my career, I think I probably thought that heads and CEOs were just thinking about the strategy, and they weren't doing the operational. And now I've realized that you don't want to do too much of the operational, but you've got to be prepared to do some of that heavy lifting yourself, for a number of reasons. One, I think it's important to role model the value of hard work and attention to detail to staff, but probably more importantly to pupils. But also, I think it's about getting, especially at the start of one's headship, getting systems and processes in place. And sometimes you need to show what those systems might be in order to then create an organization that you're going to be running for 5 to 10 years. So that's definitely been a shift in my perspective. And I think it probably reflects some early naivety.
It's interesting, isn't it, how we change with the experiences that we have. And what about your own sense of identity as a leader? Has that evolved now that sort of the ultimate responsibility sits with you?
I try to be as genuine as possible, because you get found out. I live at the school. I live actually the other side of this wall. We have a boarding house above us. I share a staircase with one of the housemasters. My children are here. They see you, through good and bad, thick and thin, and you've got to be genuine and sincere. So the idea of being a kind of austere head that doesn't have a sense of humor and shows no weakness is not one that really ever appealed. And I think across the sector, I don't think there are heads like that anymore, because we just can't afford to be like that, because we're being observed the whole time. I think also in a place like Worksop College and Ranby House, they're very tight-knit communities. So, these are people that we work with day to day. They're people we're friendly with. It's important to keep those professional boundaries, of course, but we really want to be part of this community. And so being genuine and sincere in one's leadership. I suppose one thing that I've tried really hard to do, and this is probably throughout my career, is surround myself with really strong leaders. I'm very fortunate that I inherited a very strong leadership team here at Worksop College. We've got a very strong leadership team at the prep school Ranby House as well. So it's not a case of having to sort of lead from the front every day. It's more facilitating other people's workflows. It's going well at the moment. That's not to say that there won't be challenges that come across the desk in the next few months.
And one of the things about the sector, and particularly schools within ISA, is how much we value independence within our settings. How do you think independence allows schools like Worksop College to reflect and serve their local communities in authentic ways?
Yeah. I think it's thinking very carefully about the children in your care and thinking about what those children really need. So, for us, going back to the non-negotiables idea, there are certain non-negotiables. We've got to be adding value at GCSE. We've got to be adding value at A-level and BTEC. That goes without saying. I think that's an expectation from our families as well. But as an independent school, we can also do things to resource the school in such a way as to support the community within the college. So, we place a big emphasis on well-being. We place a big emphasis on the co-curriculum. We have half days on Wednesdays. So we finish our lessons at lunchtime on Wednesdays, and the whole afternoon is put to one side for activity and the co-curriculum and games. We have an on-site well-being hub, where we have counsellors who are on site. We've got QR codes around the school. You scan the QR code, you self-refer to the counsellor. That's been amazing. That's been really, really positive. But that's an independent decision that we made, not one based on statutory guidance or non-statutory guidance, but just because we recognise that that's what young people need today. What we do with co-education is also a reflection of that. So we believe in co-educational education, but we only have one co-educational house, and that's our Year 7 house. So we want the boys and girls to be together when they come up from their primary schools and their prep schools. They have their own housemaster. We resource that part of the school very specifically, and then they join single-sex houses thereafter. So for me, one of the big appeals with independent school is that you can do things, you can adapt what you're doing in a way to suit your community, and the needs will change. And I think making sure that any strategy you put together is dynamic is an important one, and coming back to that strategy regularly with your senior team.
And that adaptability, isn't it, is vital, being able to adapt to it, because every cohort's going to be different. There's going to be different pressures depending on the environment that the youngsters are growing up in, isn't it? So it's a really vital part of moving forward as a school.
Exactly.
But you've come in obviously as a new leader. How do you build trust and credibility when you've joined a very established school and with strong identities and traditions? What steps have you personally done to build that trust?
I spent a lot of time. Well, first of all, I would say that in the best tradition, I was appointed a long time ago. So you have a long time to think about the job you're going to be taking on. And some very generous old Worksopians sent me various books with the history of the school. So I spent a long time reading about the history of school, and knowing that that I was joining a place full of tradition and full of history. And actually, when we put together a new strategy for this year, the first of the three pillars is heritage. And we've done a lot of work on trying to celebrate what's come before for our pupils. I really want the pupils to know that they are part of something much bigger than themselves, that I, as well as the rest of the team, we are custodians of this school for a short period of time, and we've just got to do our very best whilst we're here. So I think, appreciating the history, learning about the history, learning about the people in this area. So the schools I worked in the past, based predominantly in the southeast, it's quite different here. There's much more emphasis on community, very friendly parents, very friendly old Worksopians. So I made a big effort very early on to attend every single alumni event I could. I want to learn about this place. I want to learn about things that have worked in the past, things that haven't worked in the past. I don't want to be reinventing the wheel for its own sake. It's actually been one of the joys of taking on a role in a historic school, is just learning about the history of North Nottinghamshire and this great place.
And a lot there, as well as what you mentioned earlier about sort of your team and your staff, it's about that community, isn't it? It's about those sort of relationships. And has this taught you anything about sort of visibility and presence in those relational relationships?
I think that's a really tricky one for any head. So how visible you are. So do you want to be the head that is, in the car park every morning, every evening? I think that's one type of leadership. I think that can be positive. But then you might also want to be the head who's at his or her desk first thing in the morning, getting ahead with work, setting targets for different colleagues. So I think it's a balance. I think you do want to be visible, but you're not embodying the whole school. You're not the whole school. You are an employee of the school. Yes, you have a very specific remit, but I think you've got to be fulfilling what's sort of on the job description and what's expected of you from the governors, and making sure that when you are visible, it's impactful. So, I think that sport and the co-curriculum, music, hugely important for the development of young people. So I will always specifically make sure that I go and see all of the fixtures, all of the concerts, not least because I know how much time it takes to prepare for those kinds of events. So it is a balance, but I think there can be the temptation to be overly visible, but at the expense of pushing the strategy forward and pushing work forward, because as we all know, the inbox is a tricky one, and there's a lot of work across the desk. You've got to make sure you're staying on top of that whilst being visible.
That's really good advice. It's building that work-life balance as well, isn't it? So that you're not leaving all of that desk work for after hours. You're actually managing to complete it sort of during the working day as well.
My wife might disagree if she listens to this later on.
Yes, I think all families of heads would question that. Now, when we're sort of thinking about the leadership, one of the things that comes into play is innovation and moving schools forward. So how do you ensure that the new initiatives you want to bring into play strengthen the community and the character and the pupil experience of the people you're working with, and they're not just about outcomes or reputation?
Yeah, taking time at the very start to take stock, have a look at the school, get under the bonnet, speak to pupils, speak to staff. I was fortunate that I was appointed and started here in April. So I kind of had a summer term to observe and to speak to colleagues and speak to parents and OWs. And then decide, well, okay, the school's in a really good place for all these reasons. How can we double down on those? Because I think the temptation is to come in and just try and bring in new ideas, but you forget actually there's a great product here. The school is very full. Why is it full? Let's make sure that we continue to be great in our USPs and in those sort of areas. And then it's about refinement instead of whole scale change. So for instance, one thing we've recognized is that our sixth form curriculum is very varied, it's very strong, but we don't want our sixth formers to view their academic subjects in a transactional way. So we've introduced a series of short elective courses. So all of our sixth formers will do a 4 to 5 week elective course on an area that's nothing to do with the curriculum. We encourage them to choose electives that are outside of their curriculum. So our STEM pupils are doing arts and humanities and vice versa. Our staff are putting those on. And many of our staff are doing it on their PhD theses or their master's theses. And they're really enjoying that. And the reason we're doing that is, I don't want a 17, 18-year-old to view learning in a transactional way. I want them to enjoy the love of learning. But that's a kind of refinement and an addition to what is already a really strong curriculum. I think advice and, albeit early advice that I'd give to other colleagues is just try to work out why your school is successful when you take it over, and don't forget those things. Don't just bring in new ideas. Just make sure that the things that make the school successful are as strong as they can be.
And that's important, isn't it? Because you've chosen the school for a reason. So you wouldn't want to come in and change those reasons for choosing it in the first place. And you've mentioned sort of pupils and conversations. So how do you bring those pupils into those conversations about change?
So I have probably the best part of my week is I sit down with what we call our heads of school. So 2 boys, 2 girls. They're called the purple gowns at Worksop. They wear purple gowns, whereas the prefects wear blue gowns. And I have a conversation with them every Friday afternoon. Friday afternoon works really well. It's a kind of retrospective on the week. What's gone well, give me the unfiltered truth. But it's also the kind of place where I start to entertain ideas. So we are becoming a sort of phone-free campus, which is really exciting. I think it's really exciting. Before we moved to making that decision, and even before I surveyed all of our parents, I asked the purple gowns, what do you think? And some of their observations were great. Obviously, they were slightly aghast at the start. Imagine not having a phone. But then when I started explaining to them, I remember one, the vice captain of school, she said to me, actually, if all of my friends weren't on social media, I would love not having to have social media. I would love not having to be tethered to my phone. And that's something that I've now shared with the senior team. I've shared with our heads of department and housemasters and mistresses, and that's really powerful. So just making sure that you're checking in with pupils and particularly pupils that you really trust and who really care about the school. I think surveying can be helpful as long as the survey has a clear baseline, that it's quantifiable over time. That's not something that we've done yet, but it's something we probably plan to do later on this year.
That's really interesting, actually, to get a view from across the community, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think the views from the students you trust is also quite a valuable insight to share, because sometimes you could be speaking to a part of the section of the community which may not be giving you as trustful answers as you would hope for.
That's right.
You also mentioned earlier in our conversation about some of your staff possibly doing their thesis, their masters or their PhD. So you're obviously investing deeply in the people around you and your team. So how do you empower your staff to really develop their leadership at every level?
Yeah, so actually an initiative this morning, and this is built off the inset we did last week. I've said that I want every member of staff, support staff and teaching staff, to think about how their role leads towards our mission and our overall vision. And I've said to them, we're going to make everyone a postcard with the mission and the vision. I want you to put it in your notebook, or put it on your pin board, and just always think about how your role is moving the vision forward. And so I think it's that. I think everyone needs to know how their role is important to the overall success of the school, and that they are a very significant cog in what is a big machine. But and I think I get the sense, although they're probably too polite to say otherwise, that staff are keen on that idea. And I think all of us work in schools, and particularly independent schools of this time, because we really care about these communities. Colleagues have been here for a very long time. They have a wealth of expertise. It's really been that, just trying to get them to think about their impact and how that links to the vision and the mission.
And with your leadership journey, do you think there's any advice you could give to other independent schools, how they could nurture future leaders, particularly those who may not follow traditional leadership pathways? Is there anything which you feel schools could be doing that maybe they're not?
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of options, and these are options that I think in this day and age when we've got to be careful about resource and spending money, don't necessarily come with a price tag. I think identifying projects that are going to be really important to your future strategy, and almost giving those projects with quite little micromanagement, giving those projects to colleagues who are sort of up and coming, or colleagues who really want some additional responsibility, maybe colleagues who have been very senior but have senior roles in a department or in a boarding house, where actually having whole school responsibility, and maybe in the future when they look to go to another school or look for a promotion, they need to be able to evidence whole school responsibility, and saying, could you just run with that idea and then come back, maybe be seconded onto the senior leadership team for 6 months, maybe come and feed back to the senior leadership team. I think that's a really good way of doing it. And again, I think it comes back to them understanding the strategy. So if they see that one of the parts of the 5-year strategy is to do whatever it is we've asked them to do, they then feel that they're making a big difference to the community. So that's something that we've done here. I've said to parents that we really need to make sure that the quality of our teaching remains extremely high. So we are resourcing that. We are promoting professional development, both internal and external. We're looking at coaching models as well. So, and I think those are the things sometimes that can slip away from a school's budget lines, because they perhaps go unseen. But actually, I would suggest avoiding the temptation to reduce your professional development budget, because the teaching and learning has to be the bread and butter.
But just one of the things, obviously, there's a lot of significant challenges facing independent schools at the moment. They're navigating quite a complex landscape, financial, political, and sort of cultural in many circumstances. So how do you maintain optimism and clarity of purpose as a leader within this climate?
Great question. It's tricky. It's difficult. No school is immune. And I think sometimes there's the sense that certain schools might feel what's going on politically and financially more acutely. I think that's certainly true, but no school is immune. On the finance side of things, we've been prioritizing non-fee income. So just trying to make sure that we are commercializing the site. We've got 350 acres here, 18-hole golf course, absolutely amazing facility. How can we make sure that we are using that facility to the best of our abilities, so that we can bring in revenue to reinvest in our facilities? We're also looking very carefully at development and fundraising, and that's one of the reasons why we focused a lot on heritage. So I think schools need to think carefully about non-fee income. We have a colleague on the senior leadership team whose remit is the generation of non-fee income. I think if you do that well, then you can also make sure that the fees remain acceptable for our very hardworking parents. I think we're now at a stage where you can't just keep pushing fees up. Politically, it's a challenging time as well, and I think some of the views that are expressed globally are there to challenge us. I think we need to be making sure that within our lessons. We're coming back to things like fundamental British values. We are coming back to talking about diversity and inclusion on a regular basis. We've done a lot of work on diversity and inclusion and looking to see how we can incorporate that into our schemes of work, not just as one-off opportunities to hear from external speakers. And actually on that, we're also looking at our rewards and sanctions policies. So where a child might be sanctioned for expressing negative views about a protected characteristic, it's not just about sanctioning, it's about this is a great chance to educate. These children will go on to, be leaders in society in the future. And that if we want some of these negative views to no longer exist, then actually it's the teachers and it's these types of schools that can make a massive effect on the future of our world. So it's a challenging time, but I'd say we're also fortunate that everyone knows it's a challenging time. So parents, staff, pupils, they understand that it's not a great time to be in the independent school sector at the moment. But at the same time, the independent school camaraderie has been high. I think about the ISA, I think about other organisations, and when you speak to other heads and deputy heads and staff, we all realise that we've got to get on with it and we've got to make the best of what is quite a challenging situation.
And what do you think families and communities are most valuing about independent schools right now?
I think it's the breadth of opportunities. I think it's the chance to, and I mean this in a really positive way, the chance to outsource certain domestic stresses. So, for instance, and I'll give you an example from my own personal life. I've got a 4-year-old daughter. She's not really taken to riding a bike in the way that perhaps I would have hoped. And but at the prep school, she's at Ranby House. Every Friday night, she has cycling lessons after school. That's great because that's although arguably I'm missing the opportunity to have that moment with her, it's great because I know she's getting some great support there with her cycling. I think also families are looking for convenience. Again, I mean that in a positive way. We've got parents, in most cases, both of whom are working extremely hard, very long hours to afford to send their children to schools like this, making sure that morning drop-off is hassle-free, making sure there's really good wraparound care, and that there's flexibility. We've got some very talented pupils here. We have some who are very elite. Our girl footballers, for instance, very high standard here, but they often need to go to their training at their professional clubs and that kind of thing. So being flexible around that, flexible with transport, I think families really appreciate that because they're feeling the stresses as much as we are.
You're talking beyond the curriculum here to a much more holistic approach to the care and education of all of the students, aren't you? So it's not just about what they're learning in the classroom, it's actually about the whole family and matching the needs of of those families.
Completely. And that's why we place a big emphasis on our on-site counselling service because were you to try and get a counsellor through the NHS, and unfortunately at the moment the waiting times are huge. That's not the case here. So it's trying to provide a whole life and community around that young person over the 7 years that they're with us.
So obviously you've talked a lot about your sort of leadership style and your community. So you've also got to work with your sort of governors and the people that you are responsible to. So how do you ensure alignment and shared confidence during periods of uncertainty with them?
It's been really affirming to go through a difficult period, a socio-political period with them, and to go through the imposition of VAT and so on, because we all realise the gravity of the situation, and we're all working incredibly hard to move in the right direction. I think they really appreciated having a really clear strategy, and that they contributed to the creation of that strategy. And that as a senior team, whether it's at the governing board meetings or the smaller committee meetings, we're constantly updating them on where we are up to with that strategy. And some things might fall by the wayside for good reason. So transparency, I think, is important. Making sure that you're using the governing board's skill set as well to the best of its ability. So in the summer, we did a sort of classic skills matrix exercise just to see, okay, for instance, I've got one of our governors is a great D&I specialist, does some amazing work with people and culture. We've got colleagues who have some amazing experience in terms of estates and estate management, health and safety, and encouraging the senior team do lean on these these governing board members. The flip side, of course, is that they're volunteers. They're giving up a lot of their time, and we've got to respect that. And I've been very clear with the governing board that you are non-executive. You do not need to get involved in the weeds at the school, and actually that wouldn't be a good use of your time. So trying to protect them is important. I meet with what we call our custos, who's the chair of governors. I meet with him on Monday mornings every 2 weeks, and we don't really tend to have an agenda. We go through things that are on our minds and things that are coming up in the diary. But that's really helpful, and it's nice, I think, as a head, because you often can't have some of those conversations with your colleagues in the school. It's quite nice to share some of the more tricky problems with the chair of governors.
And for anybody who might be an aspiring head, those considering taking the step that you've taken, what advice would you offer about maybe getting prepared for the role, sort of professionally, but also personally?
It's a great question. I think the first thing is apply to a school where its values align with your values. So don't jump at the first school that presents itself as being a possible opportunity. Think really carefully about that, and if that means staying in your current school for 1 or 2 more years, wait for the kind of perfect school for you to come up. I'd sort of had my eye on Worksop and knew very clearly what kind of school I wanted to go to and where that school in its strategic cycle might be up to by the time I take over. So I think that'd be my first piece of advice. I think continue to take on board the expertise around you at the school that you're currently in. And I had some really great conversations with senior colleagues at Harrow before coming to Worksop, because I basically wanted to try and get as much expertise as I could before we were no longer colleagues, and I'd come up to Worksop. And I'd also suggest, finish really strong at your school, and try and leave some kind of legacy at the school that you're leaving, because it's a small sector, first of all. So practically, it's important that you do a really good job. But more importantly, you're probably thinking about headship because things have gone well in the school that you are currently in. So make sure that you finish strong, I think.
That's really good advice. And if you are sort of looking ahead to your leadership journey now at Worksop College, what's exciting you most about that?
We've got the highest pupil roll we've ever had. And that's great. That really excites me. But there are some challenges with that. There are challenges in terms of infrastructure. There are challenges in terms of size of boarding houses, that kind of thing. So I think the big ticket items, certainly over the next 6 to 12 months, is going to be looking at our infrastructure to make sure that it supports the learning and development of our young people. We've got the most amazing historic buildings, but it's a bit like a National Trust property. You've got to constantly look after it and make adjustments to make sure that it's not causing you problems. So reinvesting in the site and making sure that the facilities are really top notch. That excites me. I quite like that. I quite like those kind of challenges. I think also looking at performance management. Now, this probably doesn't sound very exciting, but I love this kind of thing. So performance management, quality assurance, coming up with a really forward-thinking appraisal system for our teaching and our support staff. And again, getting colleagues to think about targets and aims that fit in with the strategy. We're starting to do work in that area. We've just set up a new set of school values, and the values are going to be put into that framework. So that really excites me, but I appreciate that appraisals probably isn't for everyone.
And as leaders at all levels, we always have an image, don't we, of the kind of leader we might aspire to be, or maybe sometimes kind of leader we think we are. So what kind of leader do you hope your pupils or your staff or your wider community are experiencing from you?
I mean, it's cliche, but I'm hoping authentic. I think I do wear my heart on my sleeve. Not always a good thing, of course, and you've got to temper it, but being authentic. So I give an assembly every Tuesday morning. The message that I will send to them, I then, in the subsequent weeks, make sure that I'm trying to live that message myself. Last week we talked all about setting goals instead of resolutions for the new year and the dangers of resolutions. And so I've sat down with my family, we've come up with some goals, and I think just sort of practicing what you preach is very important. I think also complete dedication. So one of our new school values is dedication. And that's because I've been saying to our pupils who have a wide range of talents, whatever you do, make sure you're dedicated. And I've said to the governors right from the start, you're going to get some dedicated leadership. I will do whatever it takes to make sure that Worksop College and Ranby House are a success. And some of it won't always be easy, but there will be a time in the future when I'm not at the school, but I want to leave the school in a very strong position at the point at which I leave.
And you mentioned sort of goal setting and setting sort of targets and things. And obviously we're recording this podcast in January. It's a time when people are thinking very much about sort of setting those personal goals as well. So how will you know, maybe in sort of 5 years' time, that your leadership at Worksop has made a meaningful difference? What is it you would like to see?
I would like to see colleagues that I work with going on to achieve the things that they've set out to achieve themselves. And that might mean, unfortunately, that they're not at Worksop College and they gain promotions to other schools. That's a tricky one, because the temptation is you want to keep your best people. I talked about I've got a great senior team, but I wouldn't be surprised in the future if they want to go elsewhere because they are very high achieving and a great group. So I think that would be a point of success. I think with our pupils, I want to see them becoming leaders, but leaders as a sort of service leadership model. I want them to be doing really well in the organisations that they become a part of when they leave university and beyond. Those that are elite in our co-curriculum, making sure that they embody a sense of humility and that they are role modelling for the younger ones coming through their sports clubs or whatever it might be. I think you can learn a lot from your alumni base, and so I want to. I think that's the way to judge it. Personally, I've got two very young children. I want to be a really good leader at Worksop, but I also want to be a really good dad. So, for me, this January was quite an introspective time and thinking carefully about how can I balance, leading a school of 850 whilst also leading a household of 4. It's a hard balance.
Absolutely, but a very rewarding one at the same time.
It is very rewarding, yeah.
So as we bring our conversation to a close, could I ask you what sustains your belief in independent education? So what keeps you grounded and motivated leading an independent school?
I think it does come down to how you can design the shape of the day for the young people. And how you can place a big emphasis on education in all its forms. Simple things like the length of the day and the use of Saturday mornings, for example. Being in an independent school gives you that flexibility. And also the flexibility to recruit really strong educationalists from different sectors, and some of those sectors might not necessarily be teaching, to really push forward the strategy. So I think those would be the 2 areas.
Charles, thank you so much for such an open and thoughtful conversation. You've offered valuable insights into what it means to step into leadership with humility, purpose, and vision. And I know many of our listeners are going to reflect on your experiences as they consider their own leadership journeys. Thank you again for joining us.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to the ISA podcast, Independently Speaking. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please do subscribe and share it with colleagues. Join us next time as we continue exploring leadership, innovation, and inclusion across the independent sector. Until then, stay curious, stay connected.
You've been listening to Independently Speaking, the podcast of the Independent Schools Association. For more information about ISA and the schools we support, please visit isaschools.org.uk.